Good evening, everyone. I am the douche with the noose, back with another video on Creepypasta scaling. If you were in the Creepypasta power scaling scene a few years ago, you most likely heard of this guy named Auren, or Auren the Absolute from I Can Tell You What Is Killing the Stars. Likely hearing how he is not only the strongest Creepypasta character, but is possibly the strongest character in fiction. Nowadays, no one gives a shit about this character, but in the spirit of me scaling other creepypasta entities, this video will be looking back on him to see if he was ever worth the hype. Okay. If you've seen my profile on Auren already, you would know that I have a lot of things to explain. Some of them are character specific. So for the sake of the video, I will be going over them when I start talking about whatever they're specific to. As for the more general explanations, I'll go over them quickly. Number one, no buzzwords. If you've ever cared about this character, you've probably noticed that this verse has a reputation of being pure power scaling slop. And it is absolutely true. It is basically what people think SCP is, and it is worse than what the author behind the Supreme Judge was doing. It being power scaling is so integral to the story that it hinders its writing, so naturally, there are a few buzzwords thrown to artificially make the things stronger. With the best example of this being the out of nowhere mention of Tagmart's theory on multiverse types, and they just go completely unexplained outside of just throwing around words like mathematics and possibilities around. Also, it is just inconsequential to the verse scaling, so I will be ignoring these and scale the verse off its own merits. Number two, no author statements. Despite what the author may say in probably the most self-defeating way possible, he totally wrote this verse just to be powerful. The dude unironically makes videos on TikTok scaling his own character, and even attempted to make a profile for Auren on Versus Wiki. So naturally, he shouldn't be trustworthy when asked questions of how strong his character is. Not like he needs to be asked first. Like, he made a post on Reddit where he actively went out of his way to name drop stuff like extended model realism. Also, a lot of his statements have zero basis in the source material, such as this statement saying that the void is an aspect of the Headless King. The original story makes no mention of this, except maybe the statement of the king, quote unquote, leaving a part of him inside the void, which doesn't necessarily mean that, and it just goes completely unexplained. So just like how I scale the Supreme Judge, I will be exclusively be using the source material. For the sake of explaining how strong these characters are, I will be using Wiki's tiering system as a reference. I won't be dwelling on their standards or whatever. I'll just point to whatever tier they would qualify for. And it's just ideal to use this when scaling junk like this, or actually powerful verses like Dark Tower. I will also be using terms like qualitative superiority and quantitative superiority throughout this video, because I sincerely think they are a step in the right direction, and we should use them if we want to evolve as power scalers. Here are some basic definitions for those terms. Lastly, the video's format. As for how this video will roll out, I'll first be covering Auren and the cosmology and like the debunks relevant to him, and then I'll be covering the Absolute and all the shit revolving around him. Alright, that is out of the way. Base Auren would be high hyperverse level plus, as he exists vaguely somewhere in an uncountably infinite dimensional hierarchy. Auren with the suit upgrade would be low reversal, as he can reach the bleeding edge, a structure that is effectively the origin point of all dimensions up until that point. The absolute, which is what people are creaming over when it comes to this verse, is just vaguely higher up in the lower reversal than the bleeding edge. Basic because his superiority over it is just quantitative. An item that is integral to the story is Auren's suit, mainly its feature to travel to other universes. He does this numerous times throughout the series, traveling to about 7 of them, but the total number of them is that there's an infinite number of them in total. However, these universes or narratives don't form a conventional multiverse. Much like Dark Tower, these universes form an infinite hierarchy where they're stacked on top of each other. And higher universes higher up into the stack see universes beneath them as completely fictional, mere words on a page. This transfinite recursion of universes builds up the multiverse local to Auren. However, this multiverse is part of its own hierarchy of the same nature, an infinite recursive hierarchy of multiverses where higher up multiverses see lesser ones as fiction. Upon hearing all of this, one might be tempted to apply the idea of qualitative superiorities to these these reality fiction transcendences. However, once you look further into them, you would realize that they aren't real qualitative superiorities without reversal ramifications. Rather, they are just quantitative superiorities, effectively dimensional differences or something similar to that. Starting with the universes within the multiverse. For one, the multiverse containing this infinite hierarchy of universes is described as a dimensional plane. Granted, the series does use the words dimension and universe interchangeably, but this is unique from that. This kind of wording is unique to this. Uh, Secondly, universes higher up into the stack are noted to still have space time in them, and the space time is the base of the universe. If the superiority between these universes are genuine qualitative superiorities, one of the ramifications of is that is beyond space time entirely, so this should not be possible at all. This gets worse once you can. This gets even worse if you could take in the multiverse hierarchy, because it is implied that the multiverse the story takes place in is just a random multiverse within the stack and isn't some kind of bottom of the stack. That would mean that this multiverse has a reality fiction transcends over other multiverses, yet space, time, and dimensionality still exist. This either means these lesser multiverses are lower dimensional, like they're beneath the third dimension, which I doubt is the intention here, and it is just kind of weird to say that because the it's infinite both upwards and downwards. Or these reality fiction transcendences aren't real qualitative superiorities. It also doesn't help that the nature of these hierarchies have been described as recursive, as in it is repeating itself endlessly. Meaning these multiverses are basically the same thing, but just stacked on top of each other. So yeah, the superiority between these universes and multiverses are quantitative, meaning they are effectively dimensional superiorities or something similar to that. Dimensional superiorities, as in the relationship between a third dimensional object and a second dimensional object, so nowhere near out of reversal. Why this is actually makes sense once you consider the tiering system of Versus Bowserwiki back in the day, like when this was originally written. Clearly, this story was trying to appeal to it, and the author himself used it to scale his characters on TikTok. Around the same time these stories were written, outer reversal and higher reversal can be achieved by having a certain set of spatial dimensions. Meanwhile, Boundless was effectively the tier for ship beyond dimensionality entirely, given it quote unquote completely exceeds the logical foundations of High 1-A. Thankfully, we have long moved on from that. Anyway, this would leave the multiverse hierarchy at high hyperverse level plus, as in it contains an uncountably infinite amount of spatial dimensions or superiorities akin to spatial dimensions. Auren exists vaguely somewhere within this stack and can ascend to higher levels of it, meaning he also should be a high hyperverse level plus. That was just base Auren. Later on in the story, Auren became able to upgrade his suit, allowing him to transcend into the Bleeding Edge. If the multiverse hierarchy are the narratives, the Bleeding Edge is the page those narratives are written upon. Bleeding Edge is basically the place where all the narratives that are that form the multiverse hierarchy are made from, encompassing all of them while also filling up the space in between them. The Bleeding Edge also has a statement of it existing beyond the edge of conceptualization and narration, but that is more so because the fact that it is the ultimate source of all narration rather than anything involving a qualitative superiority. Also, I feel the need to address it, but being beyond conceptualization doesn't exactly mean anything. Doesn't exactly mean that you're beyond all concepts. To conceptualize something basically means that you're able to understand it. So this statement just says that the bleeding edge is beyond comprehension, which doesn't necessarily have any ramifications on power scaling. At best, it would be supporting evidence for an argument that likely works just fine without it. Even if we ignore this, given what I have to say about the stuff above the bleeding edge can't have a qualitative superiority over existence. While I'm on this subject, let's talk about the void, because she has some ramifications on the bleeding edge of scaling. The void is basically a natural force that destroys narratives within existence, consuming them until nothing is left. And she eventually succeeds in this in part 7, completely bending the reality of the bleeding edge before destroying it and consuming Auren. She to she scales to and gets on the same level as the bleeding edge. The void gives herself a few statements to hype herself up to be above everything in creation. Most notably this one where she states that she supersedes everything and that all concepts in creation are nothing but a page in a book to her. Not only can we easily chalk this and the other statements of the from the void as the void just being arrogant, but it can be proven that the void isn't actually transcendent to creation, or at least not transcendent in a way that qualifies for a qualitative superiority. If the void truly have a qualitative superiority over existence, then nothing in creation can reach or interact with her, which the Headless King explicitly contradicts. The Headless King, who I will talk more about later on, but just know that he is an inhabitant of some random universe in creation, was not only able to defeat the void in battle, completely banish it from his realm, and was implied to have affected on a deeper level, with Auren saying that the Hellish King, quote unquote, left a piece of him inside it. Absolutely none of this should be possible if the void had a qualitative superiority over existence, meaning its superiority is quantitative, so not universal. With all that said, the bleeding edge would be a low 1-A structure according to Verspazuki's tiering system, which is a tier for structures that encompass all possible dimensional spaces. Auren, with his suit, is able to transcend to the bleeding edge, and the void can outright destroy it, also making them low 1-A. Now into the part you guys likely have been waiting for, and pretty much the only reason why this series stayed relevant for as long as it did. The Absolute, which, holy fuck, I have a lot to say about this guy. So, Given that, I will first be going over the debunks I have for him. With the 11 people that still scale this guy, they argue that the absolute reaches versus Buzzwords tier 0. While he may have been able to a few years ago, back when our reversal and the other tiers can be achieved by having a certain amount of spatial dimensions, but things have changed greatly since then with a new definition, new standards, and new qualifications. But despite that, they persist, and I am going to completely destroy this notion by proving how Auren violates literally all of the qualifiers for versus Buzzwords tier 0. For starters, I think it would be fair to look at the proof that someone can use to say that the absolute qualifies for tier 0. For one, he's described as an entity so massive that he can only be described as absolute infinity, something completely unreachable by any and all possibilities. Absolute infinite is basically a number so huge that it is bigger than and thus unreachable by any kind of quantity, either finite or transfinite. He is also described as the author, origin, and synopsis of all existence, and because of that, everything in existence are aspects of him. Lastly, he is described as something greater than omnipotence and omniscience, along with being beyond definition, rationale, and rationalization. All of this is good stuff, but it isn't really something that necessarily doesn't mean he is just the strongest character in the verse. All of this can just as easily be used to say that he is versus top dog instead of anything involving tier 0. And if anything, it's more leaning to that. The story, I found out what God is and now I'm being followed, gives us more on what this absolute infinity means. In this story, the absolute is described as being completely inaccessible to any levels of infinity, including stuff like alphs and large cardinals. However, these infinities, alphs and large cardinals, are in reference to the stacked narratives that make up the multiverse. This changes it quite a bit, basically meaning he is quote unquote unreachable in regards to spatial dimensions, and not even in the sense that he's beyond dimensionality entirely. It's from, like, given the context of what absolute infinity is, it's from the sheer amount of spatial dimensions he has. There's more that backs this up, but I'll go into it later. Also, another thing to consider is that these statements are from the absolute itself. And once you look beyond that, beyond his statements, he isn't so absolute or unreachable. Now onto how he violates every single qualifier versus Buzzwords tier 0. For the sake of the explanation, let's work underneath the assumption that the absolute genuinely is tier 0 and see how well it stands at the end. For one, the absolute actually lives in a realm of his own, the Narrato Grandis, sorry if I got that wrong, a library which he himself describes as infinite sized. This alone violates the primacy and unity qualifiers, as that not only means that there is something infinitely bigger than our tier 0 character and he lives in it, but also that this verse has two tier 0 things inside it. Not only that, but the absolute isn't the only inhabitant of this place, such as the librarian, who the absolute talks to in order to understand the place. So not only does our tier 0 character exist in a place bigger than him, but there are other entities separate from him in the same level of existence. Absolutely none of this should be possible and would disqualify him from being tier 0. You can't even mitigate this with the statements of him being the creator of all existence and how everything is an aspect of him, because those statements are explicitly in reference to the cosmology he created, which everything except the Narrato Grandis. Even if we do baselessly say that these statements extend to the Narrato Grandis, meaning he is one with the Narrative Grandis, which I'll just be calling the library from now on, and all the entities inside it while simultaneously living inside himself somehow, he still would not be tier 0. It has been stated by the librarian that the Headless King is powerful enough to damage the library. This is incredibly weird given how the Headless King exists in some random universe far below the library, and is treated as being stupidly powerful by Auren because he is able to manipulate space, time, and natural law, none of which should be relevant when dealing with tier 0 characters. We can't argue that this is referring to some kind of true form for the Headless King, like how Auren relates to how Auren is an avatar for the Absolute. It is said that the Headless King is just another aspect of the Absolute, an avatar like Auren, and the Headless King is being referred to separately from the Absolute here. This simultaneously confirms that the Headless King exists on a lower level of existence in comparison to the Absolute, being just an avatar of him, and that the library is being threatened by a lower entity, which also should not be possible if it was truly tier 0. Even if we do assume that this is a higher being akin to and separate from the Absolute that is threatening the library, not only would that violate the Unity qualifier again, but that would mean that the library can be damaged, therefore is susceptible to change, violating the immutability qualification. A tier 0 character would be immune to any and all forms of change, which the library, and as a result, the Absolute, clearly aren't. If you've been keeping track so far, our tier 0 character has violated 3 of the 4 qualifiers for tier 0 on Gewsbumpz Wiki. So the likelihood that he genuinely is tier 0 is very slim, and this leaves us with only one qualifier left, which he also violates. This qualifier is indivisibility. The power and existence of a tier 0 can't be broken down into simpler parts, meaning they can't exist on any level beneath them. Like, they can't just make themselves a 3-dimensional or even an universal character from like sheer transcendence outside of the usage of avatars. The verse violates this qualifier too, and in a pretty explicit way. The librarian, a character that exists on the same level as the Absolute within the library, gave himself a physical body while inside it. This isn't some avatar on a lower plane. The library just went from a non-physical being of quote-unquote pure principles to a corporeal entity with physical existence. This pretty clearly goes against the indivisibility qualifier. And even if this is an avatar that the librarian is just controlling like a puppet, the fact that physical stuff can exist in the structure at all goes against the Absolute librarian or the Narrative Grandis being tier 0. It isn't possible for something with physical composition to exist within an universal structure, let alone the tier 0 structure. Remember what I said about the absolute's absolute infinity statement in earlier on in this video? Well, this is the extra stuff that backs it up, because that is the only interpretation that would allow this to make any kind of sense. So, our tier 0 character violates every single qualifier for Gewsbumpz Wiki's tier 0. So, it is unfathomably unlikely for him to actually make him tier 0. In saying that, I want to bring up one last thing, a sort of final nail in the coffin. At the end of the series, it is revealed that Auren is actually an avatar of the Absolute. An avatar he made so he can experience emotion. However, in doing so, he lost his memory of being the Absolute, now thinking he was always Auren and needed help from the librarian in order to remember the fact that he was the Absolute. This heavily goes against the immutability qualifier because a tier 0 would be utterly changeless, and this shows that the absolute is still bound by change. Even something as simple as changing a character's mind or mood is enough to automatically disqualify them from being tier 0, let alone said character suffering from fucking amnesia. So the absolute and really anything in the verse can't possibly be tier 0. So where exactly does it land in comparison to everything else? Well, we don't really get a lot on the narrative grandis besides the fact that the rest of the cosmology is a lower plane of existence beneath it. Given all I just went over, with how like the Headless King is a threat to it and how physical shit can exist inside it, its superiority over the rest of cosmology is likely just yet another quantitative superiority, thus leaving the narrative grandis and the absolute as just vaguely higher in the low universal than the bleeding edge void. This would be the segment where I go over any speed scaling or cool hacks that Auren or the Absolute may have, but he doesn't have anything in either category. No abilities that could be useful in a versus match, and the best you can get him speed wise is infinite speed. Given the stacked nature of the versus cosmology, Auren is pretty much any universe. Auren is Auren in pretty much any universe would be bigger than infinite amount of other universes beneath it. But even then, when it comes to like entities on the same level of existence as him, he is just an ordinary person. The final stats of Auren come out as base Auren being a high hyperversal level plus, meaning he has an uncountably infinite amount of spatial dimensions to his being. With his suit upgrade, he would be low universal, given he ascended to a structure that is basically the origin point and total collection of all spatial dimensions, and the absolute would be just higher up into the low universal. Given his superiority over the bleeding edge and everything else is just a quantitative superiority. Anyway, that'll be it for this video. I've been meaning to cover this video because honestly, cover this video, cover this verse because honestly, it has just annoyed me since I first discovered it through a friend. If you want to see everything I have on Auren in the Absolute, you can find my profile on him down in the description with profiles on stuff like Gewsbumpz, Doom, SCP, and Dark Tower. Also, down there, you can find links to channels run by my friends who have also made videos on Creepypasta entities like Zalgo, Sonic.exe, and Herobrine. I hope you enjoyed this video, or at least learned something from it. As I am making this, I have a voting poll going on for which you guys to decide what video you would like to see next. Have a good day.